Okay, while everyone is still joining, I'm going to get us started on some basic pencil sketching exercises, which now this is something that everyone should just do all the time as much as possible. This will essentially it just helps you with moving your hand with a certain ease. So whatever sketching you need to do, you will be able to do it much easier over time. Hi, Prabha.
Hi.
Prabha is joining today.
Hi there. Hi,
Hi.
everyone. Hi.
This month, Prabha, we are doing recipe illustrations. So I'd sent you two links. I don't know if you had the time to have a look at it.
I haven't been through them yet.
Okay, take your time.
I will
It's
go
not
through them.
necessary that you need to do it before class or anything, but just to bring you up to speed. Like when we spoke yesterday, I told you that we've already done a few things where we're just drawing different whatever is required for recipe illustration. So we've done a bunch of fruits and vegetables earlier. Now then we did just a casual sketching style so that you know how to make a quick sketch and throw in some watercolor in that. And today we are doing something with layouts. But before we start on understanding layouts, I've just sent a couple of pictures as reference images to get everyone warmed up to do just some pencil sketching. Now this I put on the group because we spoke yesterday about how you need a little help in pencil sketching also. And Jasmine, now that I see your illustration that you made during the holiday, the glass and all, I think there is still some hesitancy in the line, and that can come. That's just something that we need to work on. It's like oiling the process of drawing with pencil, and in time you won't need to hesitate making whatever line you need to make. Part of that we did last week when we drew with pen directly, and then you didn't feel the need to use a pencil or to even correct your lines. Something similar, but here we are going to focus on just the movement of the hand. So I want to do a little bit of a demo, and we'll spend just 10 minutes trying to do this sketch. A 10-minute warm-up exercise with pencil sketching generally works very well. And after today's session, I'll also share some more images, all pencil sketches, which you can use to study how what direction the lines are made, and what density, what darkness, and hopefully start building a better understanding of pencil work. So while I'm doing this, I'll also explain how that will help in other ways of doing art, in other medium as well. So the pictures I've shared with you, I'm just going to share on screen so you know what I'm speaking about. All right, so these are very basic pencil sketches where we focus on changing the angle of the line that we are drawing. That will help in creating a certain amount of mobility in your fingers, in your wrist. And there are multiple things that one achieves with this. One is understanding how the pencil itself works, how you can make sharp lines, blunt lines, dark, light, lines that are finite, that seem infinite. I'm going to explain all of that while I make one of these sketches for you. The accuracy of the illustration is not the focus. So even if your apple lands up looking like a watermelon, don't worry about that right now. The apple is, or the picture over here is just a reference image. What I need you to focus on is how you go about in the execution of this, how you start, how you move your hand, and how you're able to translate what you see onto paper in 2 dimension. So here we've got one object, and here we've got two objects. Both of them are shaded in a very casual drawn line rather than a smooth shading to make the object look more realistic. Though the lines seem to have been made very fast, the illustration seems to be a quick sketch. That is not necessary either. So you can take your time in drawing the lines that you are comfortable with. So if, say, for example, in this patch here, if you take a long time to draw these lines, it's perfectly okay. You don't really need to speed up for just the sake uh, of imitating the illusion of a speedy sketch. Okay, because for you, I would like you to observe the lines, the directions of the lines, and go, and also different, say, varied lengths of the lines, how they keep changing from one area to the other, and how just with those lines you achieve a sense of depth and also texture. All these things will start becoming apparent the more time you spend in doing this, even if it's one sketch. So first and foremost, the grip of the pencil is very important. Normally, we hold our pencils like this, and our movement of the pencil is just in one direction. But I want you to try and move your finger back a certain amount and hold the pencil at least an inch away from your normal hold. This way, you have less pressure on the pencil. When you're drawing, it also creates a larger arm for you to draw more accurately large spaces. When we are drawing with a closer grip, our entire hand moves. So we need an awful lot of control to be able to make that accurate shape. When we hold it further away, we can, in one stroke, make the same thing with minimal movement of hand parts. So accuracy improves over there. When you are drawing, always as a practice, aim for multiple lines. So if you're drawing a circle, trying to draw a circle perfectly like that is not needed. Whether or not you're successful at it is a secondary matter. But draw lines which are light. So instead of drawing a line that is very defined and strict, make your lines playful. Then once you have drawn a basic shape, you will sculpt by using short lines and create the shape that you want. So in this case, the apple has got a little dent on the top, and then using the circle as a base, I just change its or modify a little bit of its shape to get the shape that I want. Now, line quality is quite important. One line, when you draw a regular line, would be like this, because we are supposed to make very defined lines to write alphabets. So these lines are defined. They are usually very short and dark throughout. But when we are drawing, we don't really need defined lines. They are usually long, and we also need them dark or light. So the line that we need to draw is almost an infinity or infinite line, where you can't see where the line ends or starts. Sometimes you don't know where it starts, but it can end properly at one point. and sometimes the other way around. So these ends are really important. You get them very easily if you hold the pencil a little far away. So say if I'm drawing this stalk now, I could make multiple lines to draw this, but what I will not do is draw lines like this. These lines do nothing. They just shake your own confidence. So don't draw lines one after the other. You can, if you want, draw one line. If you're not happy with it, draw another line next to it and make a better shape by going over with micro adjustments. And do not erase anything in this. Do not erase at all. So once you have drawn the shape, you're comfortable with it, identify the various areas where you have different kinds of lines. You have short lines in this area. Then you have slightly longer lines in a different direction in this area. And then another set of lines in this area and so on. So we have, in the beginning, we have divided spaces to give us the right area. So we don't have to do this on the fly. Now, at every point, look at the reference image and try to imitate one set of lines. So you will see several lines which are seemingly one set, like this is a set of radiating lines. And of course, on top of that, you will see another set of lines which are in another direction. So at one point, make one set of lines. Then if you need, you can make the overlap. Once an illustration is done, you never know what the sequence of making those lines for the artist was. So we use our best judgment to replicate the effect. But the sequence may be completely different. So here now I've got a completely different effect altogether because I have kind of replicated the lines from the first circle or part of the circle here. In the reference image, a lot more is happening on the right-hand side, but it's really dark. So I'll leave all the dark tones for later. Now, as you can see, I'm not making my lines like this. This is a very tedious way to hold a pencil and make lines. So hold your pencil sideways and learn to make lines like that. And you can keep moving your hand in all directions to make lines with a sideways hold. This hold helps you to see a large part of your illustration without your hand coming in the way of your vision. And this hold also is again a very nice way to draw a quick succession of lines without having to move your hand to make those parallel lines. Trying to make these parallel lines holding with a regular hold is a nightmare. Then the lines that you make also in time will become much easier to make without getting too many dark start or end points. You won't be doing this. So imagine if your pencil tip is on a pendulum. At some point, the line comes down and makes contact with the paper and then it goes back up again. That is the kind of line we need. You can draw this in both directions or you can draw it just in one direction. So one direction would be almost like you're making a circle in the air, and as your pencil comes down, it touches the paper and then it goes off again. So those are the kinds of lines that really work well for pencil sketching. So in the beginning, keep your speed slow. Focusing on how the pencil is moving in your hand. As much as we think of a pencil as an easy tool to work, when you need to do art with pencil, it's a completely different ball game. Here, the pencil moves much differently, and there are many more aspects to the pencil that heretofore we've not even employed when we are writing. Now, as you proceed, it'll become clearer and clearer what you need to do in what area. And even if your shape is not as is seen in the reference image, let's assume this is your first pencil sketch and made from a sketch. And we are not aiming at getting the exact shape or rendering in pencil. But we are just exercising the fingers and the hand. And also, to some extent, a very distant achievement would be seeing something and replicating on paper. Now, the more lines you make, the denser the color becomes or the tone becomes. So you start getting dimension with that. Darkness and density of lines will give you a more three-dimensional effect. And to enforce that even further, you can create a little bit of a shadow. Now, this shadow in the reference image is going out of the boundary. So we are just going to convert this into a small oval shape coming towards us, and go ahead and fill that up as well. Pretty much like how they have shown in the picture. And of course, at any point, if you feel you want to experiment with making your own set of lines, that is always welcome. So these exercises are should be seen as if when you go to a gym, you are strengthening your body. If you think about all the gym equipment that is there and what they expect us to do with it, one might think that tomorrow we have to either pull an elephant across the street or lift insane amounts of weight, God knows what. But you never really need to do that, right? But you're just preparing your muscles because that is the healthiest your muscles can get, stronger, healthier, or more flexible. Yoga, take yoga for an example. You're never going to contort your body practically for that, but you're just keeping your muscles healthy. So this exercise is like that kind of exercise where we are not looking at whether this is an apple or a watermelon. This is just an exercise for our fingers. That way, you're not attached to the outcome so much as focusing on the process. Now, another thing to keep in mind is keep both hands on your artwork. Don't hold other body parts like your head, your neck, your chin, your knee. Often that is a more comfortable position for people to sit, but that is very imbalanced. So you strain one or the other part of your neck, your shoulders, lower back. That can be very painful. Check if you're breathing okay. Pencil sketching or generally art, unfortunately, for beginners can be very stressful. It's quite ironic. Don't as much as you can try to have a nice regular breathing cycle, because the easier you breathe, the less pressure you will hold with your pencil with. If you're biting your lip, you're probably holding your pencil also in such a death grip. It's almost like you're threatening the pencil. I dare you to make a mistake. I'm going to break you. So we don't want that sentiment at all. And it creeps up because obviously whenever you're doing something new, you tend to be a little anxious or apprehensive. But remember, there are no falls over here. You're not going to break your bones. Even if you goof up, that's just allow whatever is happening to happen. And then the observation is very important. So in some places, you will notice that the lines are good. You could probably point that to yourself and make a happy face. In some places where the shape is wrong or you think you could change it, make the adjustment wherever you can if you feel the need. But don't erase the earlier line because that is a very important landmark for you to know where you have potential vulnerabilities. Okay, how's it going? Comfortable? All right. So this is something that you can do with absolutely anything in your house. And I'm going to recommend this. Usually in the first or second class, I recommend this to all students. Literally pick up anything around you and try to sketch it. So I just have this little dibby around me. You can keep it in front or you can hold it in your hand and try to sketch that. So whatever you are sketching, keep the lines light and don't spend more than 10 minutes. Even 10 minutes is too much. And create some kind of likeness of what you see. And as you, the more lines you make, you'll start seeing the shapes more accurately. And even if you don't make it look exactly like it is supposed to, or you think you should make it look, it is fine. If you can shade it using lines, in a way replicating what we have just done, then try to do that. Experimenting in art is always welcome. And of course, there are no mistakes. And as much as we might think there must be a right or wrong way to do things, there isn't. If you get the outcome that you wanted, whatever tools you have used to arrive at it, they are valid. So the quick sketches are meant to develop your hand-eye relationship. Just being able to hold a pencil, see something and draw it is coordination. But here, there's much more that you can do. So keep the quick sketch under 10 minutes and focus on one pencil grip or hold, line quality, pressure, the number of tonal values you get. So if you have ample range of pressure, you will get multiple tonal values. If you can change pressure in maybe from 0 to 6, you will get up to even 10 or 12 tonal values. All these are tonal values. And the more pressure or combination of pressure and density of pencil you put in, the darker you get your lines. All right, so this is it. That's all you need to do. It is not rocket science. It is not very difficult, uh, but it is invaluable. Okay, shall we move on to understanding layouts for recipes? Okay, so here are the first two books that we did. So it'll give you a little bit of context as to what we are going to do today. When you're thinking about recipes, often we are thinking only about the ingredients, but there are other things that come into play when you have to make a recipe illustration. So here are some samples of recipes made by students of the 2020 batch. That batch was really a workshop for lettering. That's what we had started with. And they got very excited and decided that this would be a good idea to participate in the annual cookbook recipe, I guess, cookbook, Students Illustrated Recipe Book. So there are different types of presentations or layouts you can employ for your recipes. And I want to go through what you can do, how you can think about the recipe, and how you can arrive at a pleasing composition. In books like these, it is the illustration that needs to be the hero, but the recipe also should be accurate, it should be engaging, and ideally, somebody should be able to make what you are sharing. All of us have different sensibilities, so all of us will have a different way of expressing. The way we know that is by the fact that of the recipes that I'm showing you, some will catch your eye, some may not be very appealing to you. Some sections might seem nice, some may seem like, okay, if only this was not there, I would have liked this recipe. So that is an indication that you do have your individual preferences. So what I'm going to go through today is how we can arrive at deciding on what composition works for us. That's one. Second is to also help you out a little bit with backgrounds. All these recipes are on a wide background, but what you can do to make the backgrounds also compelling. And lastly, a little bit of lettering, a little bit of just brush lettering. It's a quick style with which you can make letters that can look attractive, and you can make them in watercolor, multiple colors, even markers if you want to. So this was in 2020. This was in 2021 or 2. This is last year.
These are being done by students.
These are all done by students, yes.
So nice they actually.
Yeah. This boy, he is, I think now 13 years old. He wanted
Wow,
to
don't
participate.
say.
Yeah, he wanted to participate in the recipe so much. The condition was that he has to be able to make that recipe. So he said, okay, I've asked my mom and I have helped her make the recipe. Can I then participate? He was very sincere. So there is a little bit of photo retouching that I do once I receive the recipes. Not to colors, not to forms, but sometimes in spacing. That's just bound to be the case. But more or less, I think 90% of it is untouched.
All the pen, it's all pen, right? The text.
Yes. All this is micron pen.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go over understanding layouts. So when we are visualizing a recipe, we have to keep in mind that this is a book. So when we make something on a sheet of paper and then it has to be translated onto a book, reprinted, there is a little gap in understanding often. When we make it on paper, we make it as if that's the only thing that's going to be seen. But here, there are some differences. When we work with something as tactile as a book, there will be a right side, left side, front and back that we have to contend with. More often than not, if you are doing a double spread of text and picture, pictures are generally kept on the right and text is kept on the left. And this is only because usually in books or magazines, the pictures are the advertisements and the text is just articles, which is what most people are supposed to buy a magazine for. But because they're sponsored by various companies, their ads come to the right. So knowing this is important. Of course, you can change this. So in a picture, you can just look at an image and you don't really need to keep it down. For right-handed people, at least, it's easier to hold and read the right-hand side more. So in that case, you can put the text on the right and the pictures can be on the left. Now, the elements that go into this. In the text part, you have the recipe, which in turn will have a title. Then it will have the body. And then maybe some minor taglines.
Ingredient.
So in the body text, we have a whole lot that has to come in. In the body text, we will have ingredients, you will have method, you might also have some special processes. You might have some special instructions. And sometimes there could be some kind of narration. Like if you have learned a recipe from a special person, you want to write a story behind it, that can also be included in the body text. So the reason why these three are divided or separated is because all three of them will have different types of lettering styles. The title will be one lettering style, the body text will be one lettering style, and the taglines will be one lettering style, at least. Now, in the pictures, what are the different kinds of illustrations we can have. One is we can have the ingredients. Second, we can have tools. And we can have the two together also. It's not as if they are mutually exclusive. Three, we can have processes. Four, we can have embellishments. Five, we can have actions. So let me explain the differences. And like I said, they can all be in combination with each other, or just a few of these, or just one at a time. So when we say action, sometimes there are certain things that the action of doing maybe the more romantic part of a recipe. Like, for example, if there are certain recipes that require whisking to a stiff tip or something like that, that is such a big thing. That itself can be the recipe's illustration. Embellishments are all the other things that you require for the recipe. For example, if you require specific tools, if you're making a recipe that requires fresh coffee, then if you want to show a whole coffee plantation, or you want to show a scene behind it, where you would want to make that, that would come under embellishments. Also, there would be other things which are unrelated to the recipe, but which you want to keep in the frame to create a mood for the illustration. Processes are pretty simple. Sometimes a recipe requires multiple processes. You will have grinding, you will have mixing, or whisking, and all of that. And all those can be illustrated. Say, for example, if you have something like a plain white vanilla cake, all the ingredients are pretty bland. So you would have eggs, which would be white or maybe brown. Then you will have flour, sugar, butter. Everything is very bland. But if you can imagine, if we are doing tools or processes, you have a beautiful bowl in which you're whisking. So you don't need to show the eggs. You could show the eggs and sugar and vanilla essence, but the glory of the illustration could be the mixing bowl. Then from there, if you want to show that these are baked, you could also show an illustration of an old oven or a fancy oven or a vintage oven or a baking tray. So that's what I mean by processes and tools. All of this depends on what your ingredients are, what you're making, and which are the prettier elements. And ingredients, of course, that's the simplest to do. Mostly we want to, the whole point of these is to maintain a certain, a certain logic to it. You have to, the illustration has to be attractive. So in all of these, you have to look at the more attractive elements and then choose which of these would be the most attractive combination of elements to choose from. All right. Now, this is not the whole exhaustive list. I'm giving you headers simply because if you come up with something else that you feel you can add to this, go ahead and add to it. All of these are lists that can be changed, and they can be modified to suit your purpose. All right, now let's get into the process of composition. So the first thing, even before you start the illustration, is to write the recipe. So you write the recipe in full. You can write it on a piece of paper or you can write it on your laptop. Anywhere is fine. This way, you understand the volume of text. Once you've written the recipe, try to make rough sketches. And make multiple. So they could be even thumbnails, which are literally a small size where you can compose, or they can be a large scale. Make them in pencil. Make multiples. And varied elements. So not the same thing over and over again. Rough sketches are meant to just be visualizations. So this will help you to visualize that volume. Now, once these two are done, when you start coming into a more, you've identified what composition you're going to do. Visualize, I guess I could also write composition. Once you do this, illustrate isolated, or I guess illustrate elements in isolation. Okay. Now, if something like that were to happen, I have completely messed up the spelling over here. Isolation. If this happens, please don't correct it. Leave it like that. This is not my final sheet. And I don't know how many people are going to read this. And even if they do, the smarter ones will know that this is a spelling mistake without me having to point at it. And the people who are dumb enough to not know what this is, there aren't too many of them. They probably would not mind anyway. Oh, okay. So here now, you ought to try different illustrations of some of the elements. Now, let's take maybe a salad. So for a salad, what is required? You require a container. So you can think of varied salad bowls. And try to just illustrate these in isolation. So you have your containers, then you have some ingredients. And in this, you can see varied options. So suppose, what if I try the particular ingredient as a piece that is cut or chopped or diced? How does that look? This helps you again to solidify your visualizing. This is regardless of what composition you want to make. All this will help you to come towards a better idea of what you want to compose. Now, you should also do this in the medium that you are going to make the illustration in. So if it is watercolor, practice the watercolor. Try and see what kind of effect you get in watercolor. So once all this is done, you are in a better position to come to planning the layout. Depending upon the volume of your text and the complexity of your elements, you can decide on whether you want to make a single page layout or a spread. Okay, here also what you should practice, one of the elements, so all these are the elements. You must also practice the text, and I'll come to that next. So some of the simplest layouts for a single page can be like this. And some of these can also be used for the double spread. You can have the title on top, you can have some kind of illustration, and you can have the text. And you can have variations of this. Like you can shift the title down, the illustration up, the text all over the place. Then you could just have a whole illustrated page where you can have the title and everything is an illustration. And you can have the text interspersed in between. And you could have something where maybe the illustration is front and center. The text is also like an illustration, and say something like a tossed salad or whatever, you can literally make the text also part of the illustration. So these are just three very basic illustration options that you can avail of. But whatever you do, there are a few things that one needs to keep in mind. Just a few things of for composition, how you decide what works. Most importantly is you will know how much space all of your elements are going to use up. So you know whether if there are too many, something like that would be better. Too few also, something like that is fine. Over here, they have to be optimum. You can't have too many elements that are floating, like you have 8 ingredients, 3 processes. You can't do all of it. You have to choose one or the other. And here again, if the processes are far too many, but you have an end result that looks like maybe a blueberry cheesecake or something, it's such a beautiful thing in itself that you don't need to write everything down. You could probably get away with this. So this is actually great for just a tossed salad or a lemonade or something. So after you figure out your volume, you need to know the order in which you are going to illustrate. Things like color. Are you going to keep all the ingredients in a color coordinated manner, or are you going to keep them all over the place? Form. So that means, are you going to keep the green veggies together? Are you going to keep the round veggies together? Things like that. So these are just things you have to, that are clues or cues for you to take a decision. What you would like to do. Sometimes you have size. You could always have an illustration where you have the tiny elements on top, and then medium to really big elements. So these are all basic composition tricks, and you can play around with that. And the last one is texture. So this is the order that you need to keep in mind.
Texture isn't texture of food.
Textures of food, yes. And this may not be valid. Huh? Some places it may be valid, some places it won't be valid. Like when you're making cakes or something, there's hardly anything with texture until you bring in a strawberry or a blueberry or a fruit, then the texture will matter. But then if it's in isolation, then there's no order required. You know what I mean? So what I'm trying to give you over here is uh, something to think about when you feel that you are locked and you don't know what to do next. Then you say, okay, can I categorize these by color? At least you know that there's a next step that you can go to. Now for spreads, all these are valid, but then you have to do a little bit of text layout options. So in text layouts, you can have, again, like I said, varied options, and you can try out all these options in rough. Or if you have 2-3 recipes, try a different layout for 2-3 different recipes. So where do you want to put the all these? You have a title, you have body text, and you have minor taglines. So like I said, you can put the text on top, or you can also put the text, the title along the side. You can have part of the body text divided like this. I personally prefer when the text is a little organized. I never recommend writing text sideways because it's a little disorienting. And unless it's an illustration where you can play around with the text direction, make it radiating, or the whole page is illustrated, when there is only text, I would avoid it. You could also write your title right through the middle because it's an illustrated recipe. You could write your method on one side. So here you can really be creative because a recipe book which is illustrated allows us to play around with all these things. And then the last one, you could probably also put the title with the text, with the other illustration. So you could have the title here, especially if the recipe is very complicated. So I'm going to just make some complex looking object. Put a tagline here. And especially if you want to write some kind of a narration, you can have that narration, and you can also supplement a few illustrations to the narration. if you have a story about where this recipe comes from, you could create a watermark of the location even on the text page. So do some background, which is also valid for everything else, so that the illustration stands out. Now, these are literally tip of the iceberg suggestions. The more you delve into this, the more options you will find, and the more confidence you will get to do more and more different stuff. Any questions so far? Okay, so I am trying to move a little fast because, as usual, my lesson plan is extremely ambitious, but I don't know how much to achieve, where to put a stop to that. All right, now let's come to backdrops. Backdrops are often misunderstood. Many people think of backdrops after the whole illustration is made. And that's bound to happen for beginners because we don't know as beginners where the illustration stops, how much is enough. So in the beginning, if you're doing these things, it's perfectly fine. But remember that after a certain amount of time, you will be able to plan the backdrop beforehand. Backdrops are not afterthoughts. Now, in the event that you are making a very dark colored backdrop, that also the execution can be done afterwards, but the thought must come before. You have to plan that a dark backdrop is what you're going to do at the end of the illustration. So we have light backdrops first and dark backdrops later. Simply because that's how watercolor works best. Now, backdrops can be color washes. They can be textures, painted textures, of course. You can have prints or weaves, whatever you can illustrate. They can also be landscapes or cityscapes. And they can also have props in interiors. So imagine a fully laid out tea service. That can become a backdrop for a tea cake. And again, there can be more you can add to it. If you have an idea ever that, oh, this is also a nice thing. For example, you think a plant might be a good idea, please add to that. All this becomes your bank and you can go back to it as often as you want to for inspiration. Now, how do you assess whether or not you need a backdrop? Backdrops are best for simple looking food or ingredients. When you have too much of the same color, so simple or monochrome colors. When you are making a backdrop, the forms or shapes of the main recipe should not clash with the backdrop. And ideally, you need to avoid clutter. A cluttered page can be very disorienting. You don't want that. Okay, so let's try a few of these. I'll just give you an idea. We're going to make some small thumbnail illustrations. If you have a micron pen, you can draw directly with the micron pen. We are going to use watercolor, and but the watercolor will not affect the micron tip pen ink. If you don't have a micron pen, then you can just use a pencil. Even pencils, gray lines are pretty good. You don't need to have dark black lines for this. Okay, I'm gonna go get my watercolor. So for this size, just use a medium-sized brush, number 4, 5, or 6. Keep a rag handy because since it's a small area, if we have puddles of color, we can quickly dab the brush to reduce that. Now, color washes are nothing but staining the paper so that you're not left with white paper anymore. Washes are made using paint which is very runny, and the amount of pigment in that is variable. Sometimes you can use very little pigment and lots of water. Sometimes you can stain the water with a lot of pigment also and still be able to make an effective wash. Choose whichever colors you want. I'm going to choose cobalt blue. And I want to show you this consistency. Don't mix too much paint. Your paint should not be more than the area that you're painting. And the consistency of the paint should be such that it runs freely on your palette. Though the palette is usually a metal surface or a glass surface or a pewter surface where paint can run very easily, and paper is slightly more absorbent, so it won't run as much, but this consistency helps us in just knowing that if we were to tilt paper, a part of that color would come to the lower end. So let me, this part will explain itself as I proceed. Whenever you're making a wash, always keep your paper tilted. Making washes when your paper is flat usually tends to pull the color in different areas without your control. So I want you to just observe this first. Don't paint with me. First, just see this and you can paint after that. Your medium must be mixed beforehand. If you are in danger of running out of medium, then there's a chance that you might get a very patchy wash. Load your brush quite a bit. You will see that the brush is fairly thick towards its tip. An excessively loaded brush, when you put it on paper, you will see extra medium come down towards the end or the edge of that application. With every successive line, you are giving a new space for that paint to sit and stain. If the paint is of a good consistency and liquid enough, you can do this very aram se. You don't need to rush through this. Before you run out of paint, load the brush again. I'm not pressing the brush as much as just bringing it in contact with the paper. Now you can see I've run out of medium. And I run out of medium because much of the water is being absorbed by the paper. This way, I just have to make these very easy lines back and forth. And I can also add a new color. Now there's enough pigment at the bottom so that I can make a little puddle of green and change the shade over here. And as the shade is changing, I can wipe my brush because the color is now corrupted. Wash, wipe the brush, take the same new color again, and come back and finish off the painting. Now there will be a little bit excess paint over here, which again you can wipe the brush and very gently touch the surface to remove excess so that you get a nice even wash throughout. Okay, do you want to give it a shot? All right. Okay, all done? All right. Now for the next one, let's try making a watermark. So watermark is nothing but just a light coloring of a particular, uh, maybe a particular object, sometimes out of focus or very light, so that you can put text on top of it and the lines of that object do not interfere with your text. I remember when we were kids, we used to get these letter writing papers with envelopes and they had beautiful watermarks. Now, watermark can be over the entire page in the center, or it can be in a corner. You can leave a white space and also make the watermark. It's up to you. But this one, I want to show you a complete, a fully painted page. So let's again start with, again, let me show this to you. It won't take too long, and then you can follow afterwards. We can do the same thing and start off with a blue backdrop. Even with blues, you can change the hues, make them light or dark as you proceed, because multiple colors will often make the wash or any painting a lot more pleasant. Now here I'm going to make the watermark in one corner. And what I'm going to do is, as I come to the corner, I'm going to reduce my blue paint and just keep water. So I'm going to wet that area. But as I'm coming towards the corner, I've changed the direction in which I'm painting. Now here again, I'm checking that my paper is just damp and not too wet. So I'll tilt it a little bit to see that the water is just sufficient so that I can take the next color and I can drop in a few maybe floral shapes. Which as they dry will make it look like out of focus flowers. They can also look like out of focus vegetables if we want to, but why would we want to do that? And then a nice shade of leaf also. Now the second color that I have put is not too watery. It's not as watery as the first color. Because if it were that watery, then it would just spread all over the place and make a puddle and look really ugly. At this stage, when I put the second color in, I had kept the book flat because I don't want it to run down. I want it to run all over the place. The sole purpose of this style of painting or background is just to give some sort of interest to the page so that when you write on it, it is evocative of a place or maybe a mood. This is often a trick also used in painting where you would first paint, wash, put some wet on wet colors to create fuzz. And then part of these flowers can then be made more uh, detailed so that they look like a um, whole bouquet of flowers, of which some are out of focus and some are in focus. Okay, are we done? All right. Now, the third one that I want to show you can be of landscapes. How to create a landscape as a backdrop for your illustration. Now, this requires a little bit of planning, so you know exactly what you're going to show and then how you can make the illustration. So, part of it can be the like this is now the backdrop for our recipe only, not for the main item. But assuming that this is going to be the backdrop for the main text part, you need to balance that out, the backdrop out, with what you are illustrating also on the facing page. So, for example, I'm making the a page of vada pav recipe, okay, and I've just drawn vada pav, but I want to write the recipe with the backdrop. It's perfectly fine. So in this case, I could show maybe a fort in Maharashtra or something. So again, it's the same thing, but here uh, we can pay a little more focus to the landscape. So we have a whole lot of hills in Maharashtra. It's like drawing or painting a landscape in half or a fraction of the colors that you would otherwise. The difference between these two, though both are watermarks, is in this particular case, I can put more elements at a different point. So this would be a backdrop pretty much like the first one. I could put in some more elements like a deeper colored green for trees maybe. And as is the case with backdrops, or sorry, landscapes, when you come closer to the foreground, the colors become more vibrant. So using all the elements of proper landscape painting, you just create that illusion. So it's not just spreading a few bunches of colors. You can also draw trees in the foreground on the top of the page. So you create a proper frame. So here there's it's like a progression. In the first one, it's just washes. Here we've added a little more recognizable element. And here we are going one step further and making it more contextual also, following the principles of illustrating landscapes themselves. And this is a more elaborate framing technique, which we're going to come to next. As this dries, I can make the colors more vibrant. So instantly, this becomes more evocative of a location. Now we have some other options. Let me know when you're done, then I'll proceed with the frames. I don't want to rush you. We're at 5 minutes to 4. I'll take another 10 extra minutes if you don't mind. If any of you need to leave, then just you could exit the room and then maybe watch the video afterwards. My intention is to show you at least 6 options, but let's start with 3 and let's see how far we can go within the next 15 minutes. Framing is relatively easy, much easier than these. And frames are a quick way of making your illustration look a little formal. Depending upon the rest of the colors in your recipe, choose an analogous color, which is a color that matches some shades in your recipe already. So let's take maybe there's something blue happening. All you do is create a frame that is a certain thickness all around your recipe. Simple enough. This can be done before or after. I would recommend making it after the whole recipe is done, but do plan it because you need to then make the recipe a little more inside the page, leaving this frame untouched or available to paint. The next option is to create some shapes. So you can create shapes like these. Either you can make a rectangular border or avoid making something too simplistic, but also not too complex. Draw lines on all 4 sides without corners and then just join the corners with a flat line. Join the ends of the lines with a flat line. This will give a slightly vintage look. And then you can combine the two also. You could have a vintage like border like this maybe.
For the vintage look, you're using this thinner brush, right?
You can use a thinner brush. I'm just using the same one because I have, it has a nice tip. Okay, so one tip when painting is, I don't know whether you have painted before or not. So just to give you some direction, when you are washing the brush in the water container, don't plunge the brush right to the bottom and wash the living daylights out of it. Don't touch the brush to the bottom at all. All you need to do is rinse from the top. We don't need to rinse the bottom. And then when you are wiping the brush, again, do not plunge it straight onto your rag. Always wipe it in such a way that you are reinforcing the tip of the brush. So for every application, the tip of the brush will be ready for use. Storing of the brushes. Keep them upright, not in a box where the tips can get damaged. All right, so once you've made this, you can again use any color you wish, either a contrasting color or a similar color, maybe. Let's try an orange or a yellow, or a mix of the two to fill in the space around. I'm leaving a white border because I don't want the colors to mix. One thing that's good about watercolor is that the colors will sit in a very unpredictable manner. Now, here's something that they don't warn us before we start watercolor, that you can't control watercolor. It's the same as when people recommend you should have a baby, but they don't tell you what that actually means. 90% of the time you're tired and you don't get any sleep, but oh, the baby's so cute. So it's the same thing. Watercolor looks great, but it can be very unpredictable. Fortunately, unlike with babies, with watercolor, the less you try to control them, the better they behave. I suspect that might be the same with babies also. So in the process of painting, if you have patches of dark paint in some places, lighter paint in some places, just let that be. Okay, we still have another 8 minutes. Let me see if I can do 3 more. And the brush lettering, then we can take up at the start of next week's class. Now here the frame can be of different types depending upon what backdrop you want to make. If, for example, you are making the illustration of junk food that has been kept on some wooden plank or a wooden table, and this is on the facing page, then on the text page, you can have a few elements of that wooden table also with a certain section that is opened up. Or you can make a watermark of that wooden table or as the base also. Let me show you the section part. You could take the elements of a wooden table and literally draw it out. So for example, let's say there's a frame on the table. So you draw part of that frame. You could probably draw some thicknesses so that it looks like a three-dimensional object. You could draw a few nails maybe. And essentially you are going to illustrate an element like wood around the recipe. So I'm going to use a wash of yellow ochre, burnt umber, and a little bit of black. That's yellow ochre, burnt umber, and a little bit of black. And paint this properly. So this is not going to be like a watermark. In this place, you can think of all sorts of things that you can make a frame out of. You could make a cane basket, maybe. You could make plants. You could make, what else could you make? Maybe curtains, a window, anything, an actual object that you have converted, or you make a frame of, and then you write the text inside this.
So you said yellow ochre, black, and
Burnt umber. You could actually make windows also. Some architectural windows are very specific, like Mughal architecture, Gothic architecture. If your recipe is a recall to that time, that era, or that culture, you could just convert this into one of those kinds of windows also, like a jali window from Mughal architecture. Would look very great if you're going to make the recipe of some Mughlai dish. The next one can be ingredients or tools. So you could make a frame out of different ingredients that you're going to use. So all the fruit and vegetables that you've used for the recipe, you can make them over here. Or you can also use specific tools like you have, what do you have? Say, for example, you're making the recipe of a cake. You can have a cake stand. You can have whatever this thing is called. Shivani, you'll be able to tell us. The thing that looks like a
To
spade that
take the cake. Is it the
something.
one to take
How do
the
you
cake?
serve something to serve the cake with?
Yeah, I don't know what it's called. The triangle one, right?
Yeah, triangle one.
spatula.
Yeah.
Spatula. I thought spatula was different.
I thought the spatula was different. This is
Yeah.
one which is triangular, which is very decorative. So it can have a lot of filigree work on this.
It's called a cake shovel on Google,
Ah, okay.
but spatula for me is the one you use for mixing when you're doing
Correct.
the
Yeah.
It's rectangularish.
So this is not, no, so not a spatula.
No, the
This is just a
spatula
cake.
is rectangular.
Rectangular. Yeah. So all sorts of things like this. Then you can have a vintage lemon squeezer. All sorts of interesting things that you can use. So this can be like a supplement of your recipe itself. The stuff you need for your recipe, you can paint over here. You can, what else can you draw? You can draw whisks. You can draw a whole lot of mixing bowls. Jars of maybe ingredients. And then you can also just paint the inside of this with a wash. So you can combine the two and making a wash using a little bit of scarlet and crimson. So I get a nice raspberry color that I'll just apply a little away from the edges of the ingredients. When we do this, you can already see that the ingredients suddenly come into focus. Not the ingredients, the tools. Till that happens, they're just floating in space. So here the recipe will get adequate attention also, but will be well framed with the tools that you will need for the recipe, but they're not in your face. Now, once the wood texture has dried, you can do this later. I'm just doing it so you can see it in the video later. But after you finish this, I want to show you the last one in the next 2 minutes. So here you can just make a whole lot of lines in a different color, and that will make it look like wood. This is yellow ochre mixed with a little bit of light red. That's the color next to scarlet. And it's not too dark. It's fairly light. All right, now the last one is prints. And prints can be super fun because you can take literally anything and make a border out of this. So for this, you can make a space in the center where you're going to write the recipe. It can be a square, an amorphous face, shape, or an oval. And you can do all sorts of interesting prints in the space around it. So let's try making a tartan print. A tartan print is just various stripes which are overlapping. So I'm starting with a medium thick stripe, carefully avoiding that oval in the middle. I'll make these stripes equidistant, but they're reasonably thick. This is also in cobalt blue.
The background the color in the ingredients and tools is scarlet.
Scarlet and crimson, a wash of scarlet and crimson. As one side dries, turn the book 90 degrees and make the same lines 90 degrees in 90 degrees direction. Same thickness, same intervals. Now, when I say same, it's as same as you can. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But the handmade tartan look is so precious. I've also changed the number of my lines from one side to the other. Sometimes at least I feel that the inconsistencies or the so-called errors we make because humans are the way we are what make handmade illustrations more charming than machine-made illustrations. I think that discussion must be on every educated dinner table. How much is AI going to take away from us? But so long as we are able to embrace our inconsistencies and enjoy the imperfections for what they are, I don't think, I mean, it'll take a long time for AI to evolve to make errors deliberately. The whole point is that they have to be error free. I don't know whether they might be able to enjoy that fuzzy logic enough to deliberately create it. But the point over here is that our errors can look very beautiful. They're not errors, they are just the human touch. Now, this in itself is also sufficient. You don't need to do more than this. But to make it a true tartan, we can add a few more colors. I'm going to make a mix of cobalt blue and viridian. That's the green in the middle. And I'm going to make a thin line run across these fat blue lines. I am going to do this only after I'm sure that my original color has dried. If your color is wet, avoid doing this because this will only spread and make your lines darker, but won't add a distinct shade. And now on this, I can add just a little bit of scarlet. One contrasting color usually makes the tartan look very impressive. So I'm adding a thread of red through the middle. Now, as you can see, this has become a very elaborate frame. And like I was telling you earlier, this kind of frame should not be used unless your recipe is too plain. Say you're making just a raspberry cupcake or some bland looking pie. Then in that case, it makes sense to have such a decorative frame. Now, considering that these prints are very Scottish Irish, and there's a good chance that the foods from there are going to be bland looking. This might be a great frame for that. Now, technically, this is not a print, this is a weave. Okay, so that's it. I'm 20 minutes over time. Sorry about that. This is just to make up for the sketching bit that I did earlier. I thought that would be important to do. And I can take on the rest, the text part of it, in the next class. Okay, I hope this is not too fast. There's too many things I know I've done. But try to, if you can, try to make a half page of each of these, just like a sketch. Right now, what we've done is thumbnails. Try to make an A5 size wash, make a small recipe in that. Keep the recipe small. Don't reduce the size of your lettering to accommodate it in the page. And maybe try sketching right next to it, try sketching some parts of a recipe that you would like to try. Just give it a shot, whatever you're cooking today or something at the top of your head, maybe brownies or cookies or whatever. Just try to make that illustration. Don't worry about composition first. Just write the recipe down, individually draw out all the elements, and then try out some backdrops. In the next class, we will be making one full composition from start to finish of one recipe. So all of us will have that recipe. That way, I will walk you through what decisions or design decisions you can make as you go along. All right. Okay, so I'll catch you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.